Bum ba-dum 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 bum bum.
So I'll just do a little intro and then
Glad you can make it. Take you for a ride. How about I take you to the single side? To the single, to the single, to the single, to the single.
Whatever, anything you like. Nothing specific.
Okay. Hello and welcome to another episode of Plein, the TiKA show. Thank you so much for joining us on another episode. I am a bit loopy because it is 7 a.m. here and I'm usually still asleep till like 1 p.m. honestly, because I am on holiday break from school. I am sleeping as much as I can. But thank you so much that you have been watching every episode, if you have been, or you said to, wow, I cannot speak English right now. Thank you so much for joining, though. It's okay. I can edit this all to make it make sense. Anyways, this episode, I wanted to talk with my lovely guest, the incredible Pastor Sheldon. And I wanted to talk about creation versus evolution, because honestly, I'm very curious about creation versus evolution, because I'm sure, as you have heard, there's so many different points of views and there's so many different opinions, and people say this is fact and this is fact and no it's not, this is a lie, and all these different things, and there's all conspiracy theories and all these different things. And I just want to get like cold hard facts about creation and evolution, and I want you, the listeners, to be able to hear both sides so that you can make a decision on your own of what you believe to be true. I just want to make sure that everybody is able to hear both sides and hear the truth, and in order to get away from all the muddly conundrum that is out there. So I asked one of my favorite pastors to come on here and talk about the creation side of things. Thank you so much, Pastor Sheldon, for joining me. I really appreciate it so much. I know you're very busy.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So I guess we can just get right into it. My first question for you: how was Earth formed?
Good question. How was the earth formed? From a biblical perspective, truthfully, we don't have that much data. I mean, the Bible doesn't go into, detailed specifics about how the earth is formed. The main creation account that, we always refer to is Genesis chapter 1. But I think what's really important to notice in that chapter is that in Genesis chapter 1, the earth, as a landmass, as a planet, already existed. So when you look at the 7 days of creation, like when the land appeared and you have the atmosphere and the animals and plants and all that stuff, those things were simply filling the planet that already existed at the beginning of the chapter. Mm-hmm. So in Genesis chapter 1, the earth itself isn't being created. It's already there. It's simply only being filled. This raises a really important point. How long was the earth there before the creation account in Genesis chapter 1? And it could very well be that ball in space, that planet, was there for millions, billions, trillions of years. Who knows? It could have been there for that long before the actual creation in Genesis 1 took place. How was the actual...
Sorry to interrupt you, because you brought up that the earth like itself could have been here for all these years. So then are evolutionists correct when they say that the earth is like billions or millions of years old?
That would be very possible, and there would be no contradiction with the Bible. I mean, the rocks, the materials itself could be millions of years old. And as a Christian, and probably more as a conservative Christian, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I subscribe to the idea that the creation itself of life was a lot more recent, but the actual planet itself, the solar system, the galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy, these things could have been there for billions of years prior to the account we read in Genesis chapter 1. How was the earth itself formed? We don't know. God could have easily spoke it into existence, or he could have used a natural process. Scientists talk about, the Big Bang cosmology, and the expanding of the universe. And I think God could have created the universe in that way, but through that expanding process, starting at a singular point. Who knows? But I don't think that would pose any real issue for myself as a Christian in my worldview.
Oh, I heard a couple years ago, I couldn't even remember where. I think I was listening to this one Christian pastor who was also who used to work for NASA, used to be a scientist for NASA. It's on YouTube somewhere. I don't remember his name, but he said that the Big Bang Theory had been debunked by scientists.
Okay. I would have to watch the video and see for myself. I think the vast majority of scientists today still subscribe to some form of an idea that the universe is expanding constantly, that it started at some sort of singular, very dense point. Just because we can see, until today, we can see that the universe is expanding. There's probably no question about that. I think that's probably well established. As to, how much of it is true, the details that are true, it's hard to know. So here's the thing. When you're studying history and you're trying to deduce what happened in the past based on what we see today, it's very difficult. There's a lot of assumptions that you need to have. For example, if you believe that the universe started at a very singular point, and that's where the Big Bang started, and it's been expanding until now, the thing is, nobody was there to observe it actually happen. We don't know if it's been expanding from that singular point, at the same rate, from now till since then until now. Like an illustration I think about is, let's just say you walk into a bathroom and there is a bucket, in your bathtub, and there's water dripping into the bucket, right? And the bucket is about halfway filled. And so you might think, well, if the faucet is dropping water at a rate of 10 milliliters, every few seconds, and the bucket is half full, then it must have been dripping for X number of hours, right? Now, the thing with that assumption, without calculation, is you have to assume that the bucket started off empty. You have to assume that the rate in which the water has been dropping has remained consistent. And the thing is, you just weren't there to know, what was the beginning point. And so that's why it's really, you have to assume things, and in the end, you can only assume so far, and you can only know so much. Unless you were there to witness the event and record it and observe it, we're to a certain degree, we're shooting in the dark.
Okay. And you were saying something earlier before I interrupted you. I apologize again. Do you remember what you were saying? Did you want to continue your thought? It was about the earth being filled, stuff like that.
I don't know if I missed anything. Yeah, but the general idea there is that in the creation account, I believe the earth was already there, and it could have very well been there for a very long time. And then God started to fill it. He started to separate the land, and then he started to put, animals and plants and all sorts of things during that week. But I don't think the earth itself was created in that 7-day period. I think the earth was was there already. Like if you look at the account, you read Genesis 1, I think it's very obvious that all those things already existed. I mean, the earth itself already existed, and God was just kind of shaping. Like imagine a piece of clay, and the clay is there for millions of years, and then I just start to form it into something. It's kind of like that.
Okay, so as Christians, there's something about 6,000 years. Is it that the earth is 6,000 years old, or is it that life on earth is 6,000 years old? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so they get that number 6,000 by, calculating the age of the different people and, the events in the Bible. It's very hard to know, like, how much gaps there are, if it's really 6,000. Personally, I think it would probably be a lot more than 6,000, maybe 10,000, I don't know. But again, personally, I believe the earth is much, much older, probably much, much older. But creation itself, when I say creation, the biblical account of creation in Genesis chapter 1, that itself is a lot more recent. Certainly not millions of years ago. I don't believe humans were on this planet for that long. But the planet itself could have been there for much longer.
Okay, this is all making sense. I'm so glad that you're here with me to answer my questions, because there's so many gaps in my brain that are being filled and answered right now. So I greatly appreciate it, because as I'm sure a lot of people who are watching this have experienced, especially in my generation, I'm sure other generations could agree to it too, but we were raised, a lot of us were raised, well, not a lot of us. For those of us who went to public school, we were raised with the idea of the Big Bang Theory and all these different things, but I was also raised in a Christian household. So I would come home and I would tell my mom, oh, I learned about the Big Bang Theory and all these different things. And then she would be like, that's not true. And I'd be like, but that's what my teachers told me. What do you mean it's not true? So it was like, I was always fighting within myself to understand within my own brain who is correct. Like, I believe in God and that the Bible is the truth, but I also know that I need to do well in school and get good grades, and I need to listen to my teachers too. So I'm sure a lot of people can empathize with me by saying, like, it's been really confusing understanding this whole evolution creation business. So thank you once again for clarifying things. My second question is, how did humanity come to be? Were we really amphibians or cavemen, whatever all that stuff is, or what?
Right. So again, from a Christian perspective, from a creationist perspective, I personally subscribe to the idea that human beings were created as humans in the image of God from the very start. But I think it's important to note that some Christians, as well as non-Christians alike, believe that humans evolved over millions of years. And they believe that they share a common ancestor with apes. Now, one thing I want to emphasize here is that, notice I didn't say that they believe we come from apes, but that we simply share a common ancestor with apes. So that's something I think Christians often misconstrue. So why do I personally subscribe to the idea that that we as humans were created? Well, for one, I believe there are good reasons to believe in the existence of God. I believe there are good reasons to believe in creation. And on the flip side, I believe there's a lack of evidence that humans definitely evolved from lower life forms or share a common ancestor with apes. Sometimes they say we have found, prehistoric man, we found fossils for other beings. For one, those seem, quite rare and far in between. If we really, evolved over millions and millions of years, let's say 6 million years, I would simply expect there to be some more fossil evidence of that. that seeing that incremental, gradual changes from a very lower life form all the way up to how we are now, which is, just extremely complex. And I would expect us to see that even today among living creatures today. But instead, I think we see, a lot more distinct species and life forms. Of course, within species, you see a lot of variation. Like you have a bunch of kinds of dogs, human beings, come in all shapes and sizes even. But we don't see prehistoric human beings walking around, or, even at least incremental changes of that. I get there's probably more to it, but I think I subscribe to the idea that we as humans were created as is. And I think we're going to touch on this in a future question, but I think scientists have to assume that we evolved over millions of years, because if you look at us now, how complex we are, there's just no way we could have just popped into existence naturally, right? It just couldn't happen. And so we have to find some sort of explanation as to how we got here the way we are today. And if creation is off the table, if that's not an option, if you don't believe God created us, well, then there's no way, that we just popped into existence fully formed and fully complex as we are today.
Okay, that's a lot to think about. My goodness. So then a question came to my mind. It's kind of one of the questions in here anyways, but I don't even know how to word this. So if evolutionists believe that there were, from my understanding, there were amphibians first, and then the amphibians kind of walked out of the water in those pictures and became apes, and then the apes became humans. But you're saying that from the creationist point of view, that we as humans, we have similarities to apes, but we did not originate. We weren't originally apes, is what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I believe that when humans came into existence through creation, we came as humans. We didn't need to incrementally somehow evolve to the species that we are now. Again, that's from the biblical perspective, which I subscribe to, and I have reasons for that as well. And I guess what I'm simply saying is, if creation is not an option for you, there's some people who they don't want to subscribe to the possibility that there was a supernatural cause for our existence, or creation and whatnot. If you're committed to a natural explanation for why everything exists and how everything is and how all biological life exists today, then probably the most logical explanation would have to be that we somehow, gradually evolved to where we are now. Like that's really your only other option, I think.
But it makes so much sense when you put it like that, like, because human beings are so complex. And from somebody who is not a Christian, but they're a rational thinker, they're going to be like, nobody up in the sky just went poof, I breathe air into you, and there you go. You're this complex being. And so it makes sense when you say it like that. Thank you. I had another question, but I think it just left my brain. So let's get back on track to my list here.
Although man was given dominion over the animals that were already there.
Can you explain what that dominion means for people that don't understand? What do you mean humans have dominion over animals?
Yeah, I think because human beings are the only creatures on earth that are created in God's image, so we're given a more advanced intellect, a more advanced judgment, moral accountability. And because of our advanced intellect, created in the image of God in his character and all those things, human beings were to manage the earth and rule over other species. And if you look at today, that's pretty much the case. I mean, is there any other species, any other animal that rules over man, or over human beings, I should say? And the answer is no. I mean, of course, like in terms of physical prowess, I mean, if I were to fight a gorilla, I'd be destroyed, right? But in terms of human intellect, you don't see humans in a zoo, right? You know, you see animals in a zoo. Not to say that, you know, that justifies, you know, keeping animals in a zoo. But what I'm saying is, like, we rule. We are the highest life forms on this planet. And that was, you know, so that we can be stewards of this planet. We are to take care of plant life, animal life, etc.
Okay, thank you. I it's been a while since I read my Bible, so I forgot the order of things. But I don't know if you can even answer this question, but I'm still going to ask, and if you can't answer it, then that's okay, we can move on. But how much of the world's view of evolution is real and based on the Bible's perspective?
Yeah, so, you know, as if it's not clear by now, you know, I'm not an expert in evolution. You know, I'm not a scientist in training, by training, or, you know, by profession. Although I have a layperson's, you know, interest in these things and have looked into these things. I think it's important to understand that when you say evolution, you know, that's really a big umbrella term, you know, that comes with many premises. You know, sometimes when Christians hear the word evolution, they're allergic to it as a whole, and they think it's from the devil, and like they just shun evolution entirely. But I think it's helpful to, you know, break things down into, you know, some of the fundamental premises of evolutionary theory. The first one being that the process of change and diversification of living things, it occurs over time. Simple as that. That's one of the, you know, fundamental premises of evolution. Change and diversification of biological life, it takes place over time. As far as, you know, that statement is concerned, I agree with it. I believe it's true. In fact, I believe it's fact. And when evolutionists say that evolution is fact, I think they're largely referring to that first premise. Evolution is fact in the sense that processes of change and diversification take place over time. And even as a conservative Christian, or even if someone is like a hardcore fundamentalist Christian, they could agree with that premise. I mean, it's just undeniable. Like if you believe that we came from Adam and Eve, for example, you have to now explain why you have Asians and Africans and Caucasians, and how do we have that? That's a form of evolution in the sense change takes place. I mean, you think about COVID-19. COVID-19 started, you know, as that original virus, COVID-19, and then since then, you know, over the span of 2 years, it has mutated or evolved, we can say, into multiple variants. One of them now being Omicron, which is sweeping through the world right now. And the reason why it's mutated is so that it could adapt and it could be more transmissible. It could multiply itself more. That's, you know, that's evolution. And so from that perspective, I believe in evolution. Now, there are other premises of evolution, such as, you know, reconstructing the evolutionary history. You know, you think about the universal tree of life. You know, if we started here and then, you know, started to branch out to different life forms. And then another premise of evolution is the mechanisms in which evolution takes place, in which those changes and mutations take place. You know, Darwin suggested natural selection. And, you know, with modern advances in genetics, you know, they've kind of combined the two to say that, you know, these variations in DNA and genetics and mutations have led to the changes that take place. Now, I think what's really important and what scientists would admit is that those two other premises I mentioned, you know, about the tree of life, how we branched out from, you know, various life forms, and the mechanisms of natural selection and you know, genetic mutation to explain, you know, where we are today with biological life, those other premises aren't absolute fact. and do not provide an adequate explanation for where we are today. And scientists are still, until this day, are still exploring and debating these things among themselves. And I think the reason for that is that they're constantly looking for a natural explanation for everything. But there are large portions of evolutionary theory that simply aren't well-established fact, and they're still trying to figure it out until today. But at least, one of the fundamental premises, that being the process of change and diversification takes place over time, I agree with it. And of course, I believe that's how God designed it to be so. Like he designed it to be able to for life to adapt and to change and respond to the environment and such. But I don't think that can fully explain why any life at all exists, or why the life as we see it today exists as is, as complex as it is. I really don't think evolution has come up with adequate explanations to explain what we see today. Starting from no life existing to then life existing, and then life, becoming more and more complex. I don't think we have adequate explanations in science and evolution to explain those things. And that's why they're constantly searching until now.
They're going to keep searching for some time. My goodness. So my next question is, where did the other side get their ideas from, the side of evolution? I know what you just said about, evolution and creation. They kind of coexist in some parts. But I asked this question because a lot of people believe that science and the Bible cannot coexist, that the Bible is some sort of fantasy land, and that science is fact and truth, and you cannot mix the two together. So I was wondering, first of all, can science and the Bible coexist? And where did the other side get their ideas from?
That's a good question. I've heard that perspective. Some scientists subscribe to a very strong scientism, like this idea that only science can explain reality. And the problem I have with that view is it's self-defeating. You cannot use science to prove the truth of the statement that you can only get truth from science. Like it's self-contradictory. We need to have various fields of study. We need to study philosophy. We need to study science. We need to study natural theology. We need to study ethics. All these things are a piece to the puzzle that gives us our worldview and what reality is. If you come from the idea that no, we can only use science to establish fact, well, that gives you such a narrow view of reality, and you can't even use science itself to prove or to show that science alone is the source of knowledge and truth. Now, where did the other side get their ideas from? When it comes to evolutionary theory, and I touched on this earlier, I think what's really helpful for us to realize is that, many evolutionists, they assume that life evolved from lower life forms, and that explains our existence and the complexity of life today. It presupposes that all life, past, present, and future, has come about only by natural means. This is otherwise known as naturalism or methodological naturalism. In other words, even before they do the science, even before they go to the laboratory, they have already committed themselves to the idea that only natural means can explain the existence of all biological life, rather than being open to the possibility that a supernatural means, such as God or creation, is possible. So if a person has a prior commitment to naturalism, then evolutionary theory really is the only explanation we got. No other theory comes even close to explaining life as we see it today through only natural means. And that makes sense. Like when you look at the sheer diversity and complexity of life, if all these things came about only by natural means, then it had to have taken millions and millions of years, or billions of years even. Like there's just no way human beings, the human brain, or whatever, could just pop into existence fully assembled. It had to take millions of years. And so, and the only reason why it had to take millions of years is because if you're committed, again, to only natural explanations for things, you can't appeal to a God who created the universe or created life, then evolution is really your only option. And so when evolutionists see through the lens of naturalism, so when they look at things like butterflies, dogs, bacteria, trees, or whatever, they are assumed that these things were not created. They're already assuming that these things did not come about by a supernatural means, but only through natural processes and random chance. But so for me personally though, I don't think there's good reason to be committed only to naturalism. I think we should really be open to all possibilities and explanations, including supernatural ones. Why? For what reason do we have to rule out supernatural explanations for things? Why do we need to be committed to only natural explanations? Like, to illustrate my point, imagine if I were an archaeologist, okay? I'm digging into the ground and I'm looking for ancient artifacts. So I find a clay pot, right? I find an ancient coin, or I find a structure or a building. When I find these things, I'm not committed to the idea that these things just came about by natural means, right? I'm not going to suggest that, maybe this clay pot came about by wind or water erosion, right? I'm not committed to the idea that this coin somehow came about by natural means, right? I think, the obvious explanation is that, these things came about through ancient civilizations who once lived, who designed these things, who intentionally put these things there. And I think when we look at biology, when we look at life today, I don't think we should be committed to the idea that the only possible means in which life exists is only by natural means. I think we should at least be open, even scientists should be open to the idea that things were designed, that things were created with purpose. Even if in the end you don't subscribe to that, you should at least be open to that as a possibility. Because once you start crossing that off the list, or you remove that from the table, then I think it really narrows your view on how you look at things. And it can even lead to wrong conclusions. Like, for example, if I find a clay pot in the ground and I'm committed to the idea that only natural means brought about this clay pot, then I'll come to the wrong conclusion that wind or water erosion brought about the clay pot, rather than the possibility that an ancient, intelligent civilization brought that pot into existence. And so, going back to the original question, where did the other side get their ideas from? I think it largely stems from that commitment to naturalism. They're committed to only natural explanations. And that's why they have to see science and biology through that lens of naturalism, which, to say humbly, I think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake to cross out that possibility of supernatural explanations.
Wow. That was an award-winning speech right there. But I completely understand what you're saying. And I 100% believe that a lot of our problems in this world stems from closed-mindedness. racism and our views on the LGBTQ plus community and stuff like that. It just all stems from closed-mindedness. And I really agree that if we were all just a little bit more open-minded, I think that civilization would be even in a tiniest bit of a better place. But wow, we can be really closed-minded at times. My next question, I really need an answer to this. I really need an answer to this. Really. Are dinosaurs real?
Are dinosaurs real? Well, for one, I think the fossil evidence of dinosaurs is abundant. I mean, we have, in some cases, almost fully assembled, skeletons of these dinosaurs, and they come in abundance. Like, we have a lot of examples of this. So as far as if they're real or they existed in the past, I think there can be no question that these fossils are real and that they once belonged to living animals. And I guess maybe what you're wondering is like, well, how do we view this from a biblical perspective or as Christians? A popular theory among Christians is that these creatures were, perhaps a result of sin or biological manipulation that God did not see fit to preserve through the flood on the ark. And so they were thus destroyed or extinct. Or perhaps these animals were part of original creation, but they just became extinct over time, just like many species today. Until today, hundreds, maybe thousands of species are going extinct all the time. Thing is, there's really no way to know for sure. In the Bible, there are examples of animals that could be alluding to dinosaurs that coexisted with humans, like you read in the book of Job, like the Leviathan or Behemoth. Are those referring to common animals that we know today, like whales or alligators or sharks, or is that referring to the dinosaurs that we see in the fossils? I don't know. We're not sure. Again, there's really no way to know for sure. We weren't there. We're just kind of trying to draw assumptions based on what we see today. But definitely they're real. No question in my mind.
I had a question. I completely forgot to put this on the list, so if you can't answer it, it's okay. But it just came to my mind. What about the Ice Age? The Bible doesn't talk anything about the Ice Age. How do we look at the Ice Age from a biblical perspective? If you can't answer, it's okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, from biblical perspective, there wasn't an Ice Age. At least there's no record of it. If there was an age in which like the earth was covered in ice, I would imagine the Bible would have touched on it, like especially like how it touches on the flood and such. But yeah, I haven't looked in it so much myself as to like what strong evidence do we have that there was an ice age. But at least as far as the Bible is concerned, we don't see we don't see that as something that happened in history.
My goodness. Okay. And we keep talking about the flood, and that just goes into the next question. Can you explain the flood and Noah's Ark? There's movies about it, and a lot of people are like, this is fantasy. I don't know about all this. How did a man build such a big old thing? And like, it makes no sense. Can you explain the flood and that whole situation, please?
Yeah, I mean, so most people are aware of the biblical account of it, right? So, God felt that, man had sunk down into, depravity and immorality. And so he thought to preserve, the animals and Noah and his family, and end up pretty much destroying everything else. I don't have to go into details of that. But I guess what you're asking is like, Is that just fantasy? Can we really believe in a worldwide flood? I think if you come from a secular perspective where, again, you're committed to naturalism, you're committed to God doesn't exist, creation didn't happen, we're only here by natural explanations. If you're committed to that, then yeah, I could understand why the flood would be hocus pocus, complete myth and legend. But if you're open to the possibility that God exists, that miracles are possible, that supernatural intervention is possible, then I don't think there's anything unreasonable about the possibility of a flood actually happening. That God, causing a universal flood to take place. And there could be evidences when we look at the Earth today that there was a huge catastrophic flood event in the past. Sometimes when I look at huge land masses that were carved out by something, like, you can go to certain places around the world, like in Utah, or, see other natural, artifacts, and you wonder how in the world was this formed? And again, there are different theories about that, but I think the flood is a possibility as to how, these things were carved out. You look at the Earth today, and most scientists believe that, all the continents were once connected, right, as one landmass. But now you see, like, they've separated. You have North America and South America, Africa, etc. And they kind of look like a puzzle piece that fits together. If they were separated at some point in history and drifted from each other, the flood, again, could be one possible explanation for that. But again, what's really difficult is that we weren't there. We didn't see these things take place. And so sometimes when we're trying to deduce what happened in history based on what we see today, you're often prone to making mistakes. But is it completely unbelievable? I think it's entirely possible, especially if you believe in or are open to the possibility of supernatural explanations for things, or the existence of God. What I do find most interesting is when you look at many ancient civilizations around the globe, they have in their history, they have their own flood story. They have their own flood account. Of course, we have the biblical one in Genesis chapter 6 and onward. But other ancient civilizations have their own version of it. And you have to ask yourself, why do they have a story of a worldwide flood in their history? Mm-hmm. Is it a coincidence that other people groups have their version of the flood story? Or could it be that they have their own version because they were passing down the story from generation to generation? According to the biblical view, there's Noah and then his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, right? Maybe those 3 sons split and then they formed their own civilizations and peoples, but they preserved that flood account. Of course, it got tweaked and it got modified and changed, as stories often do. But the point is, they have their own version of the flood story. My personal theory and assumption is that the reason they have their own version is because this was a well-known fact that they experienced a worldwide flood, and they wanted to preserve that story throughout the generations. It just seems too much to say just coincidence that they all happen to have a flood story.
Interesting. I have 2 more questions for you. This one, I've heard different perspectives from different Christians about this question. And so I'd love to hear what the Bible actually has to say about this, because I am really confused about this.
Okay.
But did angels really come down from heaven and create half Super Saiyan humans? Is that where we get witches and warlocks from?
Did angels come down from heaven
I don't
and create
remember
half
where
Super
it is
Saiyans?
specifically in the Bible, but there was a name for those giants.
Giant. Okay, yeah, I know what you're referring to. I'm pretty sure you're referring to what it says in Genesis chapter 6. Let me go to there real quick. And let me read it out. Okay, so in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 to 4, it says, "When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days." I think that's what you're referring to. "And also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." Okay, it's true. Some Christians look at this passage, and it's pretty much the only passage in which you can draw such ideas from, that angels, referred to here as the sons of God, came down and had intercourse with human beings and somehow gave birth to super giant, mighty man offspring. Okay. Personally, I strongly do not subscribe to that view. I don't believe that angels procreated with human beings to create superhuman human beings. But some other Christians, even prominent ones, do subscribe to that view. For one, we have to realize this is the only passage which you can even remotely draw that conclusion from. And so it's really risky to draw ideas from a single passage. And it's better to just say we're not sure, if that's the case. You don't want to establish any concrete, and confident views on anything just based on one passage. If there were multiple passages that seem to suggest that angels could procreate with humans, then I'd be open to the idea. But it's just this one, and even then, there's really good reasons not to believe that perspective. So here's let me give you a few reasons why I don't believe that this passage tells us that angels procreated with human beings. Number one, the sons of God. When it says sons of God, it's not conclusive that this is referring to holy angels. Okay? If they were holy angels, you can be sure they wouldn't commit such a strange and sinful act by sleeping with and creating superhuman beings, babies. If they were evil angels, they wouldn't have been called sons of God. Okay? And then again, Jesus in Matthew chapter 22, verse 30 says that in the resurrection, angels neither marry nor are given in marriage. Okay? So that verse tells us angels don't get married and they don't engage in marital, relations like that. Okay? And then in Genesis chapter 6, verse 3, it's clear that it was human beings who had to face the consequences. In verse 3, it says, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh, his days shall be 120 years. There's no evidence here in this passage that angels also got punished or faced judgment or consequences for these actions. Number two, angels are spiritual beings, whereas humans are physical beings. So the idea that a spiritual being could somehow, procreate with human beings just doesn't seem likely. It's very far-fetched. Sure, angels can take on physical form, as they do in the Bible. They often appear sometimes as human beings. But to think that they can actually become human beings and that they can actually procreate with human beings is just too much, too far of a stretch, I feel. And then the question is, who do the sons of God refer to? Okay. For one, when it says sons of God, it's not conclusive that automatically refers to angels. There are some passages that could suggest sons of God in that instance refers to angels, but you also have that term used for human beings. And so I think a far more reasonable explanation is that the sons of God is referring to God's true followers, God's worshipers, those who worship God specifically from the line or the lineage of Seth. Adam and Eve had children. Cain's line didn't turn out so good. They strayed away from God. But then Seth's line preserved the worship of the true God. And so when it says sons of God, I think it's really referring to Seth's lineage. In Romans chapter 8, verse 14, it says, all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. Right? Mm-hmm. So, and this is used in other verses as well, the same idea. So sons of God could simply be referring to human beings who follow God. And I think that's a lot more likely explanation than sons of God referring to angels. So you also mentioned, is this where we get witches and warlocks from? I think witches and warlocks are just normal human beings who have committed themselves to those occult practices, but are not like hybrid, human beings, half angel, half human.
Then who are the Nephilim?
Yeah, I think that's just a term that they use to describe these human beings with certain characteristics. Maybe they were big, tall, strong. You think about like Goliath, for example, and other giants in the Bible. Like they were recognized for being abnormally tall or strong. And it could be that, when the sons of God, when they intermarried, I guess you can call this intermarriage. Like imagine a Christian marrying a non-Christian, In this case, so it says here that the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive. So they were physically attracted to these women, even though they were pagan or, they had strayed away from God. But they were attracted to them and had children. They chose them as their wives and they had children. And so there must have been some physical attributes about these women that they found attractive. And then when they had offspring, their children had certain physical characteristics. Like maybe they were tall, big, strong, who knows? So, and then they used that term Nephilim to describe them. Again, does that word Nephilim automatically guarantee, these were super hybrid human beings? I don't think so. So.
Okay, well, thank you, because that was really like, when I first heard that, I don't even remember where I first heard it from. Either was a pastor or just some prominent Christian person, and I was like, what? Are you serious? It felt like a fantasy novel. It was weird. But thank you for explaining that. My last question for you to wrap this all up in a pretty little bow. Why do you believe what you say, which everything you said is from the Bible? Why do you believe the Bible is truth?
Good question. So first off, while I'm confident in my general worldview, and I truly believe in it, I don't want to give the impression that I claim to have absolute truth in all things. Everyone else is wrong. My views are correct. I think we should take a more humble, moderate approach to how we view things. We have to recognize that there's an enormous amount of information we don't know. And the more, what I've realized as I get older is that the more I know, the more I realize I don't know anything. we should always be open to further exploration. We should always be open to the possibility that we're wrong in certain areas. And we should be open to the possibility that there's a lot of truth that we haven't yet discovered. With that said, why do I think my views are true? Why do I personally subscribe to them? I think there are good reasons to believe that the Bible is inspired, that the Bible is not just a human-produced book. It's like an ancient piece of literature. I believe that it's divinely inspired. I believe there are good reasons to believe in the existence of God, or at least be open to that possibility. And I don't have time to get into all of those reasons of why believing in God is a reasonable, viable option. But I think a key thing for me personally is that with what I've experienced, what I've studied, and in just my own personal relationship and encounter with God, for me, I've come to the point where it's so real that it's as real as the chair that I'm sitting on. Now there might be an atheist who's listening right now and they say, well, that's your subjective experience. And that's true. But I would guarantee that if they were in my shoes and if they could experience what I have experienced and seen with God, they would come to the same conclusion. In the end, I don't care if 1 million people say that my view is wrong and they have X number of reasons to show why my view is wrong. If I've experienced and seen it for myself, it really doesn't matter what other people think, because it's as real to me as, again, the chair that I'm sitting on. For example, if you witnessed a person committing a murder, right? You saw it with your own eyes. Even if 1 million lawyers come to you and give you reasons why that person didn't commit the murder, if you saw it with your own eyes, it wouldn't matter what the lawyers think, right? Because you saw it with your own eyes. And I guess what I'm trying to say is, with my personal experience with God, I know for myself at least, it's not just mere subjective experience where I'm deceived or where it's come to the point where I can't unsee what I've seen. And to go against my views as a Christian would be to go against my own personal experience. It's like me sitting in the chair and saying, no, I don't believe this chair is here. Like it would be just like that. Has everyone had that experience? Absolutely not. There are many people who have not had that experience. There are many people who say they can't feel God or see God or, experience God. But if they're open to it, they can. And if there's someone listening right now who's curious, say, yeah, what if God is real? If you're at least open to that possibility. I'm not saying you have to absolutely believe right now. Like, if you're at least open to that possibility, why not offer a skeptic's prayer? Just pray and say, God, you know what? I don't even know if you exist. In fact, I lean toward you not existing. But just in case you are there, just in case you're real, I would like to encounter you. I would like to know you. And I think one thing we have to understand, though, is that there are many people who just don't want God to exist. They would rather he not exist. They don't want God to muddy up their lives or to get in the way of things. I understand that. That's just the reality for some people. And in those cases, they probably won't encounter God because they don't want to encounter God. But I think if a person is open to it, if they want to have the possibility of having a relationship with God, I think God would be more than willing to reveal themselves to them in the same way that he's revealed himself to me on a personal level. In the end, God is not merely, interested in people believing that he exists. That's not the goal. The goal is not for people to merely believe he exists. God wants to have a loving relationship with people. That's his goal. He wants to have a saving, loving relationship with people. He doesn't want to just force people to believe that he exists. There are many Christians who believe that God exists, but they don't have a loving relationship with him. you know? And so that, you know, what's the point of that? So, yeah. Why do I believe what I think is true? It's true because I've experienced it. And there's other, you know, reasons for that that I can't get into now.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show and for answering all my questions. You have filled gaps in my brain, and I appreciate it, because evolution versus creation is a very confusing subject. And I really hope that everyone listening was able to also get some questions answered, as I'm sure that these are questions that a lot of people have. And I just really hope that we can practice being more open-minded and less closed-minded, just so that we could learn to understand each other better as human beings and try to love each other more instead of hate each other so cotton picking much. And I hope that you're able to even re-listen to this episode, because there was a lot of information in it, and learn something and share it with your friends and family, so that they too can learn something new, or be refreshed on a topic they haven't heard about in a while. So thank you so much for listening. I hope y'all have an amazing week, and thank you again, Pastor Sheldon, for coming on.
Thanks
Do you
for
have
having
any
me.
last words?
Happy New Year, everyone.
Happy New Year. Okay, namaste. Goodbye.